This is my dad's good friend since college, Michael West. Thank you.
Hi, am I audible? Okay. I'm Professor Michael West of the University of Pittsburgh, and I was one of Ron's college roommates. If you look at his memoirs over there on the windowsill, you see that he described his own life through high school that stopped there. I may be one of the only people here who knows something about the college years, so I'd like to try and fill you in on memories of Ron that other people didn't have a chance to share. Whenever you've had enough, throw bread at me and I'll sit down. My first vivid memory of Ron concerns throwing his bedding in the shower. An odd beginning to a lifelong friendship, it may seem, but so it was. Let me explain. It was the winter of 1955-56. I was rooming with an old schoolmate, Fred Byron, in one of Harvard's freshman dorms. Ron had been randomly assigned a room with another Harvard freshman named Brian McNaughton, a crazy old friend of mine who hailed from my former hometown of Red Bank, New Jersey, and also with a third freshman named John Vicky, who came from Polish aristocracy, wanted his name pronounced Dębinski, and viewed being at Harvard as rather a come-down in the world, as he was not slow to tell you. Visiting McNaughton sometimes, or eating together in the freshman dining hall, I become acquainted with Ron. I remember chatting with him first semester about what it was like after high school suddenly to find oneself among so many very bright coevals. Ron mentioned sitting in a history lecture, studying a map the professor had handed out, and being disconcerted when his freshman seatmate leaned over and confided that one boundary was off by 50 miles. A fact he knew for certain since he spent his summers in the cartography room of the New York Public Library studying maps of the 18th century Venetian Republic. So our acquaintance had begun in shared nervousness about the challenge of finding ourselves at Harvard and wondering how we'd fare there. But it didn't really ripen until one night early that winter when McNaughton, I, Ron, and another freshman named Bob Robinson got into a lively discussion about some intellectual point, a discussion conducted with all the lofty adolescent stupidity of which only Harvard freshmen are capable. For the life of me, I can't now remember what the topic was, but I do remember its culminating in my fleeing across Harvard Yard, pursued by Ron, Brian, and Bob, who were pelting me with snowballs. Chasing me to my suite, they pounded upon the locked door and demanded that I emerge to continue the debate. But since mine was a first-floor suite, instead of confronting them at the entry, I decided to slip out my bedroom window on the other side of the building and make a hasty sally on Ron's and Brian's suite. Bursting in on Vicky Dębinski, I stripped the sheets from my old friend McNaughton's bed, threw them in the shower, and turned the water on. Then, while Vicky Dębinski looked on in astonishment, as if to say that such practices were frowned upon in Poland's upper circles, I threw Ron's sheets in for good measure, on the general principle that a man must be judged by the company he keeps. Meanwhile, back at my suite, the trio had been informed by a returning roommate that I was no longer there. Suddenly suspecting they'd been outflanked, Ron and Brian headed pell-mell back to their third-floor suite. They almost succeeded in trapping me in the dorm hallway before I could get down, but I dodged them by ducking into someone else's room as they came panting up the staircase. Then I fled back across the yard to my own room, while they absorbed the fact that for the rest of that week, they would sleep on bare mattresses under bare blankets. They returned to hammer at the door, but by this time I'd been joined by my own roommates and felt secure. There were no hard feelings, of course, and indeed Ron, Brian, Fred, Bob, and I, bonded by such shared hijinks, chose to room together in Kirkland House next year under an arcane system where Harvard assigned the cheaper rooms to students with financial need. As scholarship students, Ron and Brian helped procure us a palatial 5-bedroom suite. Its only defect was its walk-up location on a 5th floor overlooking what was then a yard full of screeching trolleys, long since supplanted by the Kennedy School of Government. Ron's was the semi-detached bedroom directly behind the tower clock, and we used to joke that Harvard gave us the suite at a discount in consideration of his agreeing to wind it. It would have been a good bargain for the university, for unlike his 2 freshman roommates, he was a totally dependable guy. Shocked by the frivolity of America's best and brightest, the Vicky left after freshman year to embark on a career in the Catholic Church, where when last heard of he was a Monsignor. While irresponsible Brian gave him some justification by getting his fiancée pregnant and leaving our suite and Harvard midway through sophomore year to live with his wife and support the family. His bedroom was reassigned to the neighboring suite, so for the next 2.5 years, Ron, Bob, Fred, and I roomed together as a foursome. We each had a bedroom furnished largely with standard college-issue bed, desk, chair, and bookcase, while sharing a large living room with a decrepit daybed and an ancient refrigerator we'd bought to chill the bottled Cokes that Fred was able to provide at 3 cents each from those supplied to the automatic vending machine in the Harvard Crimson's office. Ron's bedroom was a bizarre little eyrie with a quarter-loon window at knee height, where he drove himself through the masses of reading required by his history courses with late-night music ranging from classical selections on Harvard's radio station to Ella Fitzgerald, singing Cole Porter. Love for Sale was a particular favorite of his. And finally, to Shake, Rattle, and Roll by Bill Haley and the Comets, to which he introduced me smilingly. On a few occasions when we felt flush enough, he also introduced us to Jacob Verst's house in downtown Boston, where for a pittance you could get a plateful heaped with spare ribs and sauerkraut, while Ron mock seriously regaled us with the historical feats of the early Germanic hero Arminius, Hermann the German, Ron called him, celebrated in Teutonic scholarship for defeating Roman legions. Ron could parody Teutonic scholarship to a T. It's often said that what makes a Harvard education valuable is not what you learn from your professors, but from your fellow students. And that was certainly true for me. As an adolescent, illness had delayed Ron's graduation from high school, so he was a year older than the rest of us and more mature. My main interests were literary, and I was politically naive. The only history course I took at Harvard was the worst grade I got, whereas Ron wrote a thesis for his Magna on the French Army mutinies in World War I. Talks with Ron were among my first glimpses of how a sophisticated mind analyzed historical and political issues. Since Harvard, my literary scholarship has increasingly embraced historical approaches, and when I write it, Ron is always in the back of my mind as the kind of thoughtful reader with a sense of humor I'd most like to reach.